I am the dangerous talker type. You know those characters that instead of fighting, talk their way out of their situations? I could tell you about the time I infiltrated an Imperial high security garrison by pretending to be other, more well-known rebels that had kidnapped a governor. Those same rebels who were held prisoner inside that very facility. I could tell about the time I tricked a lich into destroying its own phylactery, or the time I convinced an evil army to run headfirst into the trap we prepared for them, or the time I got the big bad evil guy and his bodyguards to remove all their armor and magic items as well as weapons, while the party waited around the corner. But none of those were why I was banned from playing the talker of the group. This story happened many years ago, around the time when 4E was announced. I had been invited to join a new group. There were 6 of us total: a caster, healer, fighter, rogue, myself, and the GM. I had arrived late as I worked across town and work ended when they got together. I get there and I'm told that the rest of the party are finishing up their characters, and it was not so subtly hinted that they could use another fighter type. I think about it for a minute and then tell everyone, yeah, but there's this new class I want to try. It's a talker called Noble. The rest of the group aren't happy. None of them have heard it before, and more to the point, they wanted a fighter to help protect the party. The GM asked if he could see the class, and I have the pamphlet on me, so I pass it over. The fighter takes a look at it, sees the horrible saves and the horrible attack progression, and he tries to veto the character right there, saying loudly to everyone, "He's gonna get the entire party killed! I'm gonna die from having to protect you! What good are you gonna be? You can't fight or take a hit." Paraphrasing, but that was the basic idea. The GM sees the pamphlet, gives a deep sigh, but decides the class is balanced out, if seemingly a little weak, but he allows it. Everyone sighs. Hard. I start making my character, and the rest of the party tries to convince me the entire time to go for a fighter type. At one point, I'm even shown the Duskblade class because how cool it is to be a fighter that can cast spells too. Even the GM, subtly to his credit, tried to convince me otherwise. When it became apparent I was going to stay a talker, 2 people started making new characters in preparation for when we lose, and everyone is shooting daggers at me, including the guy who invited me to join their game. But an hour later, Alona was born, an elven crown prince who is running away from his duty to live a life of adventure before the crown is forced upon his head. He has a negative attack modifier, 8 HP at level 3, but what he has is a lot of money, a minor magic item of his choice, and a lot of charisma. You'll see when those last 2 things become more relevant soon. The GM starts us in front of a dungeon. I don't remember why, I didn't even know when, but here we were. The reason didn't matter too much to me, I was just excited to play. When we enter, in the very first room, there is a direwolf that has made this room its lair. The direwolf sees us and gets ready to chomp down on the new intruders. Initiatives are rolled and I go dead last. The cleric casts a buff on the fighter, the caster hits the wolf with a ray, and moves behind the fighter for safety. The fighter, now newly buffed, steps forward and brings his great weapon down, striking the beast hard. Everyone cheers. The wolf attacks, scoring a crit on the fighter, taking half of his HP and nearly ripping his arm off. The fighter looks at me and says, "See, this is what a team player does. He protects the party. If he had hit you, you'd be dead." I nod. He's right. That would have killed me outright. The rogue moves behind the beast and backstabs it. The fighter then looks at me after congratulating the rogue on the good hit and says, "Now what are you gonna do? So someone useful can go." The rogue and Sork laugh, and the cleric is looking at his spell sheet, preparing their next move. I can't hit. I know this, and even if I did, that would only draw its attention onto me, which I wouldn't survive. The GM's question of, "What are you gonna do?" hangs heavy in the air. Looking at my sheet, I noticed something. I had chosen an elven variant that gave +4 to charisma, giving me a 22 in it, and the list of skills for a noble aren't that long, but what we do have, we get bonuses in for the most part. I had handle animal at max ranks, 6, plus a 2 class bonus, and a synergy bonus since my ranks in ride were maxed out as well, another +2. I have +16 in handling animals. I looked at the GM and said, "I'm gonna tame it." "What?" the GM asked. "I'm gonna tame it." I pull out one of the steaks from my bag. This steak is masterwork. I bought the best quality food. A noble started with charisma bonus times 500 gold and receives that as a stipend per level. So with the extra 9,000 gold pieces, I had spent to make sure that I only ate the best. Will that give me a bonus? He thinks about it and says yes. The rest of the party are dumbfounded. The fighter says, "That's stupid. It's already fighting us." The rogue smiles, and the sork is preparing to cast a killing blow on the beast for when I fail. That bonus stake gave me a +18. I roll, and legit crit. The GM decides that the crit moves it from hostile to neutral, and then my roll carries it the rest of the way from neutral to friendly. I got a direwolf pet and named it Bubbles. Begrudgingly, the cleric heals it from the damage they caused. The fighter is muttering under his breath. The sorcerer is shaking his head, not believing that it worked, and hated the name I had given it. And the cleric is upset about using a spell on this new party member that they had just been fighting. The GM gives me bonus XP, something that angers the rogue and the fighter. But we move on to the next room, with me riding my new mount. In the next room, there was a gargantuan earth elemental asleep. The fighter and rogue are salivating, thinking of the XP and gems encrusted in the elemental's body. The rest of the party instantly start thinking about strategy. The first round is surprise. The second round is flat-footed, just waking up. That's 2 rounds of attack on it at a low DC, without it being able to do anything. And then I speak up. "We're gonna sneak past it." They all look at me. "What?" 3 people say in unison. "No, we're not," declared the sorcerer. Now my class gives me +5 to diplomacy and deception. I had chose as my bonus feat one that gave me +2 to diplomacy and deception, and the magic item I chose gave me a +2 to those skills as well. I asked the GM if I can get a diplomacy check versus the party's will save, and he allows it, not realizing what he had just agreed to. I roll with my +21, and the highest will of the party is like +6. They didn't stand a chance. They all reluctantly agreed to sneak past the sleeping monster and let it rest. At this point, the rogue remembers that I'm wearing full plate armor, and that will be a heavy penalty to my sneak. If the elemental hears me, then the fight is on. I smile and say, "It's not me who needs the check. I'm riding Bubbles." And a direwolf has a lot better dex and is skilled in sneak. Bubbles made the check easily, and we go into the next room. In the next room, there was a tribe of orcs. I'm being serious. The GM threw an entire tribe of orcs at us. The entire party looked at me, hoping I had an idea. I asked for clarification on what he meant by tribe, and was informed something like 200 orcs. The party looked back at me, and the fighter asked, "How are we going to get out of this one?" Looking back now, I'm kinda surprised they were looking at me for this. The party had been looking to the fighter to be the leader, but I guess it now makes sense. I had gotten him out of the last 2 fights. I think about it for a moment, and then another moment. We're not getting out of this. And then I tell the GM, I'm going to yell the worst insult that I could think of at the orcs in Orcish. Rolling a diplomacy check, something like a 36 total, it was a pretty bad insult. The rest of the party are now angry at me. I see them seething, biting their lips. The world legit stood still for me for a moment, and someone, whom I forgot, asked, "What did you just do?" The next words I remember I actually said verbatim, looking at the fighter character who was doing his best to kill me with a look, "You guys are gonna fight. I'm gonna run." Without missing a beat, the rogue says, "I'm gonna run too." I say, "Yes, you are." Turning to the fighter who has a look of pure shock on his face, "And after one round, you're gonna run too." He gulped and nodded, looking at the sorcerer and cleric, and they just nodded. I wish I had been witty enough to say some epic quote, but my mind wasn't that sharp. The rogue and I ran, and the other three stayed to fight the now massive horde of angry orcs that I just set upon them with that epic insult. At this point, I stopped paying attention to the fight, my mind on my plan. When the GM got to us, he said, "I'm just gonna skip you guys. You're just running." The rogue nodded, but I said, "No." "What?" the rogue asked, looking confused. "We're not running," I tell her. Looking at the GM, I say, I stop in front of her and tell her to steal one of the gems from the elemental. "You know we don't have time to get treasure, right?" I nodded. "If I mess up, we're dead. You know that, right?" "Then don't mess up." She swallowed and rolled her dice. The world stood still again, and every bounce of the dice took an eternity as we all held our breath. There the rogue stood, hidden still in the shadows, holding a jewel freshly taken out of a still sleeping elemental. "Now what?" "Toss it to me." She did, and I catch it just as our allies are running in, a horde of orcs still chasing them. I toss the gem underhanded at the lead orc. The GM blinked with a look of confusion on his face. "Okay," he said, clearly not getting it. "Instinct. Something is tossed to you about the size of a ball. It's instinctual to catch it," I explained. The GM, now a little dubious about what I had planned, bit his lip. "So you want the orc to catch what you just threw at it? All right, that's going to be a diplomacy check, I guess." The party smiles, beginning to see where I was going with this, and remembering my insane diplomacy. A quick check later, the GM declares, "Okay, the leader is now standing there holding a gem, dropping his weapon to catch it. You successfully disarmed that one orc. Perfect." I bang on the elemental's leg to wake it and point at the orcs, saying, "They stole your gem." His eyes widen, now realizing what I had planned. "Okay, give me a deception check," he called, in one of those voices that say, "I don't think this is gonna work." My hands shaking. All eyes on me. The entire party is counting on me to get them out of this. I pick up my D20 and pray to the gods of dice, hoping that my plus 21 would be enough to get me through this. They heard my prayer as I critted. The party roars in laughter as the GM describes how this gargantuan elemental tears through and destroys the entire tribe of orcs. After, due to my crit, the GM said the elemental turns to look at my character, and as a thank you for letting it know about the theft, gives me an even larger diamond than the one that was stolen. This is where the GM called it for the night. He gave out XP, begrudgingly giving me a bonus for derailing all of his encounters, and even went as far as to tell my normal GM not to let me be a talker in his campaign because I was far too dangerous. The rest of the party left with smiles, even apologizing for how the beginning of the night went, and said I was always welcome back. I only played with them once more the following week as there was a major life change for the GM and the group fell apart without him. A year ago, I ran into the fighter at a local Adventure League night. We were both at the same table. When he saw me, he smiled and asked what I was playing. I told him a monk/talker. He looked at his daughter and said, "Watch this guy. He'll teach you what to do." I don't know, maybe I just read too many of these, but this is giving off a whiff of that happened. I will still take the story as a whole, but very specific crit successes tend to damage the image of a story. A tribe of 200 orcs? I wouldn't play with that GM anymore. OP kinda sounded a bit like that guy with the way that they went against the party's wishes in the beginning. I understand that people want to play certain characters, but you should at least hear people out, or at least provide valid reasons as to why you want to play a certain character instead of just keeping it to yourself. Overall, a happy-ish end, but definitely seems that things could have been handled better. What do you all think about this situation?